The first time I saw the old Chris Craft sitting forgotten in the corner of Myers Marina, I knew I had to have her. Her mahogany hull was weathered, her brass fittings tarnished, but beneath the neglect, I could see the elegant lines of a 1950s Capri runabout. The price tag made me wince $3,500 for what most would consider a floating piece of garbage, but I handed over my credit card without hesitation. The marina owner looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but I was already mentally cataloging the restoration work ahead. "She's all yours, Mr. Fisher," he said, passing me the title. "Though between us, I think you overpaid by about $3,400. "Call me Nick," I replied, running my hand along the boat's gunwale, "and we'll see who's laughing when she's back in her glory." That was 6 months ago, before I knew the battle I'd be fighting wasn't just against rot and rust, but against the most fearsome force in suburban America, an HOA president with too much time and too little sense. My name is Nicholas Fisher, and I bought my lakefront property in Clearwater Cove, Florida, 2 years ago. It was everything I'd worked for: a modest 3-bedroom with a private dock on Lake Harmony, nestled in a quiet community of similar homes. The HOA fees were steep at $400 monthly, but they covered landscaping of common areas, a community pool, and maintenance of the private beach. Worth it, I thought, for the lifestyle. I'd read the covenant, conditions, and restrictions, CC and Rs, thoroughly before signing. I'm an architect by trade. Details matter to me. There were the usual restrictions about paint colors, lawn maintenance, and holiday decorations, but nothing prohibiting boat ownership or restoration. In fact, Section 7.4 explicitly permitted watercraft storage and maintenance on private docks, provided such vessels are in working order and aesthetically consistent with community standards. The day after I bought the boat, I had it towed to my property and settled on my dock. I covered it with a tarp to protect it from the elements while I ordered supplies. That's when I first met Patricia Winters, HOA president and self-appointed guardian of property values. She was walking her toy poodle along the lakefront path when she spotted the tarp-covered mystery on my dock. I was on my knees inspecting the hull when I heard her throat clearing a sound that would become the soundtrack to my nightmares over the following months. "Excuse me," she said, voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I don't believe that's allowed." I looked up to see a woman in her mid-50s with a blonde bob so perfect it seemed molded from plastic. Her white capri pants were immaculate, her pink polo shirt emblazoned with the Clearwater Cove logo. The tiny dog at her feet wore a matching outfit. "Sorry." I stood, wiping my hands on my jeans. "That thing," she gestured toward my covered boat. "Derelict vessels aren't permitted in Clearwater Cove." "It's not derelict," I explained. "It's a vintage Chris Craft I'm restoring. The CC and Articus allow boat maintenance on private docks." Her smile tightened. "I'm Patricia Winters, president of the Homeowners Association. I'm quite familiar with our regulations. That appears to be junk, and junk isn't permitted anywhere in our community." "Nice to meet you, Patricia. I'm Nick Fisher, and it's not junk, it's a restoration project. Once I'm done, it'll be the most beautiful boat on the lake." She tilted her head, examining me as one might a curious insect. "We'll see about that. Enjoy your day, Mr. Fisher." As she walked away, I had no idea that exchange was just the opening salvo in what would become an all-out war. The next morning, I woke to find an official violation notice taped to my front door. "Unapproved structure on community property. Remove within 48 hours or face daily fines of $100. Community property?" My dock was deeded to my lot. I checked my property documents again to confirm, then called the HOA management company. "Hello, I'm calling about a violation notice I received," I explained to the receptionist. "There seems to be some confusion about property lines. Your address, please? 238 Lakeview Drive." "Oh, Mr. Fisher. Yes, Mrs. Winters reported your violation personally. The lakefront access is considered limited common area. While you have exclusive use of your dock, any permanent structures need board approval." My boat isn't a permanent structure. It's a vessel which is explicitly permitted in Section 7.4. There was a pause. I see. Well, Mrs. Winters has classified it as debris, not a vessel. That's ridiculous. I'd like to appeal this violation. Of course. The next board meeting is in 3 weeks. You can present your case then. 3 weeks of $100 daily fines would cost me $2,100, more than half what I'd paid for the boat. And the fines accrue during that time. I'm afraid so, unless you remove the violation. I hung up, fuming. This wasn't just about my boat anymore. It was about principle. I knew my rights, and I wasn't going to be bullied. I spent that day researching Florida HOA laws and documenting my property boundaries. Armed with knowledge and righteous indignation, I marched over to Patricia's house that evening. Her home was exactly what you'd expect, a larger model than most in the community, with pristine landscaping and a proud Clearwater Cove resident sign in the yard. She answered the door in a different but equally crisp polo shirt. "Mr. Fisher, this is unexpected." Her eyes flicked to the folder in my hand. "Patricia, we need to talk about this violation notice. My dock is deeded property, not community property, and my boat is permitted under Section 7.4. She sighed dramatically. "Nick, may I call you Nick? I understand you're new to community living. But there are standards here. That eyesore on your dock is decreasing everyone's property values. It's covered with a tarp and barely visible from the path. Nevertheless, the board has determined it violates our aesthetic standards. We've had complaints. Who complained? Besides you." Her smile never faltered. "That's confidential information. Board proceedings are private." "There was no board proceeding. You made this decision unilaterally, and it contradicts written HOA policy." For just a moment, her mask slipped, revealing a flash of anger. "You don't understand how things work here yet. I suggest you remove that junk heap before the fines bankrupt you." I stood my ground. "I'll see you at the board meeting. In the meantime, I expect the violation to be rescinded since it's not based on any actual rule violation." "Good evening, Mr. Fisher." She closed the door in my face. Walking home, I realized I'd underestimated what I was up against. Patricia wasn't just enforcing rules, she was making them up to suit her preferences. And from the way she carried herself, I suspected she wasn't used to being challenged. The next morning, I consulted a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. Olivia Ramirez was a no-nonsense attorney with a reputation for standing up to overzealous associations. "They can't fine you for something that isn't prohibited in the CC and Artiques," she confirmed after reviewing my documents. "And if your dock is deeded property, they certainly can't claim it's community property." "So what do I do?" "Document everything. Take photos of your boat, the dock, the property lines. Gather evidence that your restoration project is legitimate, not junk, and attend that board meeting with a prepared statement." She paused. "But be prepared for a fight. HOA presidents like this Winters woman don't back down easily." Over the next 2 weeks, I worked diligently on the boat whenever I wasn't at my architecture firm. I removed the tarp, sanded down the hull, and began applying new varnish to the wood. The transformation was already visible. What had looked like a derelict craft was beginning to reveal its elegant bones. Neighbors walking the lakefront path frequently stopped to watch my progress. Most were supportive. "She's going to be gorgeous," said Ted from 3 doors down. "Is that a 56 Capri?" 55, I confirmed proudly. "Original engine, too, though it needs rebuilding. My grandfather had one just like it, used to take us fishing on Lake Michigan." These interactions bolstered my spirits. Not everyone in Clearwater Cove was aligned with Patricia's vision of sterile perfection. Of course, she noticed the increased activity and attention. On day 10 of my restoration, she appeared on the path with her clipboard and poodle. "Mr. Fisher, I see you're continuing with your project." Despite the violation notice, I wiped sweat from my brow. "I'm appealing the notice at the board meeting. In the meantime, I'm making substantial progress, which proves this isn't junk but a restoration in process." She snapped several photos with her phone. We'll add these to your file. And I should inform you that I've proposed an emergency amendment to the bylaws clarifying that boat restoration is not permitted on private docks. You can't retroactively create rules to target a single homeowner. That's selective enforcement, and it's illegal. Her smile was icy. The board serves the community's interests. If we determine that noisy, messy boat restoration projects decrease property values, we have every right to prohibit them. As she walked away, I realized I needed to accelerate my strategy. I couldn't wait for the board meeting to make my case. That evening, I created a Facebook group called Friends of Clearwater Cove and invited every neighbor whose contact information I had. I posted photos of my restoration progress, explained my situation with the HOA, and asked for support at the upcoming meeting. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of neighbors joined overnight, many sharing their own stories of run-ins with Patricia. Some had been fined for unapproved plant species in their gardens. Others had received violations for leaving garage doors open too long or having trash cans visible from the street. She fined me $50 for having wind chimes, wrote Elaine from the north side. Said they were noise pollution. Got a violation for my bird feeder, added Mark from the west entrance. Apparently, attracting wildlife is against some unwritten rule. I hadn't intended to start a revolution, but it seemed I'd tapped into a well of simmering resentment. Patricia had been ruling Clearwater Cove with an iron fist, and many residents were fed up. 3 days before the board meeting, I received an unexpected visit. A black SUV pulled into my driveway, and a well-dressed man in his 60s emerged. He introduced himself as Richard Blackstone, the developer of Clearwater Cove and a current board member. "Mr. Fisher, I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, extending his hand. "I wanted to see this boat everyone's talking about." I led him to the dock, where the Chris craft was now half restored, its mahogany gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Beautiful craftsmanship," he remarked, running a hand along the hull. "My father had a Century Coronado similar to this." "Don't see many wooden boats these days." "They're special," I agreed, "worth preserving." "Patricia tells me you're causing quite a stir in the community," I tensed. "I'm just exercising my rights as a homeowner," he nodded slowly. "Between us, Mr. Fisher, Patricia can be overzealous. She means well, but sometimes forgets this is a neighborhood, not a military base." He handed me his business card. "Call me if you need anything, and good luck at the meeting." As he drove away, I wondered if I'd just gained an ally or if this was some kind of trap. Either way, I continued my preparations, determined to present an irrefutable case. The evening of the board meeting arrived. I dressed in a suit and tie unusual for our casual Florida community, but necessary to project seriousness. I brought a binder of documentation, property deeds, HOA bylaws, before and after photos of the boat, and testimonials from neighbors about the historical value of vintage watercraft. The community clubhouse was packed. Typically, HOA meetings drew only a handful of residents, but tonight nearly 100 people filled the room. Many wore blue ribbons, a symbol of support organized through our Facebook group. Patricia's face tightened when she saw the crowd. She sat at the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other board members, including Richard Blackstone. "Welcome to the monthly meeting of the Clearwater Cove Homeowners Association," she began, her voice artificially bright. "We have a full agenda tonight, so let's proceed efficiently." She attempted to start with routine business, but Richard interrupted. "Given the unusual attendance tonight, I suggest we address the appeal from Mr. Fisher first." Patricia's smile froze. "That's scheduled for new business after the financial report and landscaping updates." "I move to adjust the agenda," said another board member, a woman I didn't recognize. "Mr. Fisher's appeal seems to be why most people are here." A quick vote approved the change, much to Patricia's visible annoyance. She turned to me with barely concealed hostility. "Mr. Fisher, you have 5 minutes to present your appeal." I approached the podium, placing my materials on the table. "Thank you, board members, for hearing my appeal. I'm contesting a violation notice claiming my boat restoration project is unapproved structure on community property and demanding its removal. I presented my evidence methodically, beginning with my property deed showing ownership of the dock, then the specific HOA bylaws permitting boat maintenance, and finally photos documenting my restoration progress. This is not junk or debris, I concluded. It's a historically significant 1955 Chris Craft Capri undergoing professional restoration. Once completed, it will enhance our waterfront, not detract from it. The room erupted in applause. Patricia banged her gavel for order. Mr. Fisher, while your presentation is thorough, it doesn't address the fundamental issue. Your restoration activities create noise, mess, and visual disruption to our lakefront aesthetic. With respect, Mrs. Winters, none of those concerns are cited in the violation notice, which specifically claims I've put a structure on community property. That claim is demonstrably false. Richard leaned forward. He's right, Patricia. The violation as written doesn't hold up. Furthermore, I continued, there's no bylaw limiting the time or nature of permitted boat maintenance. Many residents perform regular maintenance on their modern boats without issue. A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. The board needs to deliberate, Patricia announced, clearly seeking to regain control. We'll take a 10-minute recess. As the board members filed into a side room, neighbors approached to offer support. Several shared their own restoration projects, classic cars, antique furniture, historic home renovations that enhanced our community's character. When the board returned, Patricia's expression was tight but composed. Richard spoke first. After review, the board has voted 4-1 to rescind the violation notice issued to Mr. Fisher. His restoration project falls within permitted activities under current bylaws. The room erupted in cheers. Patricia looked as if she'd swallowed something bitter. However, she interjected over the noise, the board also votes to begin the process of amending our bylaws to more clearly define acceptable boat maintenance activities, including potential limitations on major restorations. That dampened the celebration somewhat, but I'd won the immediate battle. The violation was rescinded, and any bylaw changes would require a community-wide vote, which, judging by tonight's turnout, wouldn't go in Patricia's favor. I should have known she wouldn't accept defeat gracefully. The next morning, I headed to my dock to continue work on the boat. What I found stopped me cold. The tarp I'd left covering the exposed engine compartment had been removed, and lake water filled the hull. My tools were scattered, some missing entirely, and deep scratches marred the freshly varnished mahogany. Someone had deliberately sabotaged my boat. I called the police immediately. Officer Martinez arrived within 20 minutes, photographing the damage and taking my statement. "Do you have any security cameras, Mr. Fisher?" he asked, surveying the scene. "No, but my neighbor Ted might. His cameras face the lakefront." Ted was more than willing to help. We reviewed his security footage from the previous night, and there it was at 2:17 a.m. A figure in dark clothing approached my dock from the lakefront path. They spent nearly 15 minutes on my boat, clearly deliberate in their vandalism. The footage was too grainy and distant to identify the person conclusively, but the build and movements suggested a woman. And who had the most motivation to derail my project? The answer seemed obvious. "I can't prove it was her based on this footage alone," Officer Martinez cautioned. "But we'll file a report for criminal mischief and vandalism. The damage looks to be over $1,000, which makes it a first-degree misdemeanor in Florida." I spent the rest of the day pumping water from the hull and assessing the damage. Some of my restoration work was ruined, but thankfully, the boat's structural integrity remained intact. The financial loss was significant, about $3,000 in materials and tools, but the setback to my timeline was worse. Word of the vandalism spread quickly through the community. By evening, a dozen neighbors had stopped by to offer help, tools, and support. Several contributed to a security fund that allowed me to install cameras around my property. Others volunteered labor to help repair the damage. 2 days later, Officer Martinez returned with news. "We may have caught a break, Mr. Fisher. A gas station camera near the community entrance caught someone in similar clothing buying a gas can at 1:45 a.m. that night. The clerk remembers because it was an unusual time for such a purchase. Can you identify them? The quality is better than your neighbor's footage. We're still enhancing it, but I'd like you to look at some stills." He showed me several grainy images on his tablet. The person wore a hooded sweatshirt and baseball cap, but in one frame they turned toward the camera. Though partially obscured, the face was unmistakable. "That's Patricia Winters," Martinez nodded. "We thought so too. We're getting a warrant to check her credit card records and search her property for the missing tools." The investigation moved quickly. Patricia's credit card had indeed been used at the gas station, and when police searched her garage, they found my missing tools hidden in a plastic bin. She was arrested the next day for criminal mischief, vandalism, and theft. The community was shocked not by Patricia's actions, which many found unsurprising given her temperament, but by the severity of her response to being challenged. The HOA board immediately suspended her as president and called an emergency meeting to elect an interim replacement. Richard Blackstone was appointed acting president. His first act was to issue a formal apology to me on behalf of the association, along with an offer to cover my repair costs. "This incident doesn't reflect our community values," he assured me and the assembled residents. Clearwater Cove should be a place where homeowners can enjoy their properties within reasonable guidelines, not a regime of arbitrary restrictions. In the weeks that followed, the community underwent a transformation. The board initiated a complete review of the bylaws, eliminating many of Patricia's more draconian additions. Residents who had been afraid to personalize their homes began planting colorful gardens, installing tasteful decorations, and expressing their individuality within reasonable bounds. As for Patricia, she accepted a plea deal: restitution for the damage, community service, and anger management classes. She sold her Clearwater Cove home shortly after and moved to a high-rise condo where, presumably, she wouldn't have to worry about her neighbors' boats. 3 months after the vandalism incident, I completed the restoration of my Craft. She gleamed in the Florida sunshine, every brass fitting polished, every mahogany plank perfectly varnished. I named her Liberty, partly for her classic American design, but mostly to commemorate my battle for homeowner rights. The community held a boat christening party at the lake. Nearly every resident attended, many bringing food and drinks to celebrate not just my completed project, but our reclaimed neighborhood spirit. Richard gave a toast to Nick and Liberty, who reminded us that rules should protect our community's character, not stifle it. As I took Liberty for her maiden voyage around Lake Harmony, neighbors cheered from their docks. The 1955 Craft engine purred like it had just left the factory, turning heads with both its performance and beauty. That evening, as the sun set over the lake, I sat on my dock reflecting on the journey. What had started as a simple restoration project had evolved into something much more significant: a restoration of community values, and a reminder that homeowners associations should serve their members, not rule them. Ted wandered over with 2 beers, handing me one as he settled into the adjacent chair. "You know," he said, "Patricia actually did us a favor." I raised an eyebrow. "How do you figure? Before you and that boat came along, we were all just keeping our heads down, afraid to make waves." "No one questioned her authority. You stood up not just for yourself but for all of us." I took a sip of beer, considering this. "I just wanted to restore a boat. And look what happened instead. You restored our neighborhood." We watched as Liberty gently rocked in the evening breeze, her polished wood catching the last golden rays of sunset. In the distance, children played on the community beach, and neighbors chatted across adjoining docks. The atmosphere was relaxed, friendly, alive, everything a community should be. The following weekend, I took a group of neighborhood kids for rides on Liberty. Their excitement as they experienced the classic boat was contagious. Several older residents shared stories of similar boats from their childhoods, creating connections across generations. A month later, two other homeowners began their own restoration projects, one renovating a vintage motorcycle in his garage, another rehabilitating a classic Airstream trailer for weekend camping. Neither project would have been permitted under Patricia's reign, but now they were celebrated as enhancements to our community's unique character. At the quarterly HOA meeting, attendance remained high. Residents who had once avoided these gatherings now actively participated, offering suggestions and volunteering for committees. The board operated with transparency, explaining decisions and seeking input before making rule changes. I was surprised when Richard approached me after one such meeting. "Nick, we have a board position opening up. Several neighbors have suggested you'd be an excellent addition." I hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm cut out for HOA politics." "That's exactly why you'd be perfect. You understand the balance between necessary standards and individual freedom. Plus, you've demonstrated you're willing to stand up for what's right." After some consideration, I accepted the nomination. When the votes were tallied, I was elected by an overwhelming majority. My first initiative was creating a Community Character Committee dedicated to preserving Clearwater Cove's charm while allowing for individual expression. 1 year after purchasing Liberty, I hosted the first annual Clearwater Cove Vintage Boat Show. Owners from across Florida brought their restored wooden classics, creating a stunning display that drew visitors from neighboring communities. The event raised money for lake conservation efforts and generated positive press for our once restrictive neighborhood. That fall, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Patricia, postmarked from her new address in Naples. "Mr. Fisher," it began formally, "while I still believe my actions as HOA president were in the community's best interest, I recognize that my response to your boat restoration crossed a line. The anger management program has helped me understand that my need for control stemmed from personal insecurities rather than genuine concern for property values. I offer my sincere apology for the damage I caused to your property and to community relations. Clearwater Cove deserves better, and it seems they have found that in your leadership. Respectfully, Patricia Winters." I showed the letter to Olivia Ramirez, who had become both my legal advisor for HOA matters and a close friend. "Remarkable," she said. "In 10 years of dealing with HOA disputes, I've never seen this level of self-reflection from someone like Patricia." "People can change," I suggested. "Sometimes they need a push," she countered with a smile. "Or in this case, a beautifully restored boat and a community willing to stand up for itself." 2 years after the confrontation, Clearwater Cove had transformed from a restrictive, rule-bound subdivision to a vibrant community where individual expression was balanced with reasonable standards. Property values didn't fall as Patricia had feared they rose, as homebuyers were attracted to a neighborhood that offered both aesthetic consistency and personal freedom. Liberty became something of a local celebrity. I regularly took her to wooden boat shows across Florida, where she won several restoration awards. But her greatest impact remained at home, where she symbolized our community's journey from oppression to liberation. On warm summer evenings, I often took her out at sunset, the mahogany hull gliding through the golden waters of Lake Harmony. Sometimes I'd pick up neighbors for impromptu cruises. Other times I'd go alone, enjoying the peaceful solitude. During one such solo cruise, I spotted a family on the community beach admiring Liberty from shore. I waved and brought the boat closer, offering them a ride. The father's eyes lit up with recognition. "Is that a '55 Chris Craft Capri? My grandfather had one just like it on Cayuga Lake." "Want to take a closer look?" I offered, As they climbed aboard, expressions of wonder on their faces, I felt a profound satisfaction. This wasn't just about a boat anymore. It was about preserving history, creating connections, and standing up for the right to make your small corner of the world beautiful in your own way. The man ran his hand along the polished dashboard. We're looking at houses in this neighborhood. If this is the kind of community that appreciates classics like this, it might be perfect for us. I smiled, thinking of how far we'd come from Patricia's rigid vision of perfection. Clearwater Cove isn't perfect, I told him honestly. But we've learned that the best communities aren't built on strict rules and conformity. They're built on respect, shared values, and the freedom to express what matters to you. As we circled the lake in Liberty, her engine purring beneath us, I couldn't help but think how one small stand against an unreasonable demand had cascaded into positive change for an entire community. Sometimes, the most important restorations aren't of things, but of principles. And sometimes, the most valuable community property isn't a dock or a boat, but the spirit of mutual respect that allows us all to live together in harmony.